Excellent. Just whilst we're all taking our seats, let me take this opportunity to welcome you all to Groucho Club and to Everest Group's first big in-person meeting since March 2018, I think was the last one we did. So it's great to see so many of you here today. Thank you very much for coming. Without further ado, let me introduce this morning's panel and we'll let the discussion continue. So this is David Rickard, partner at Everest Group. Ricky Sandrani, partner at Everest Group. Rohit Agarwal, partner at Everest Group. And our fabulous external speaker this morning is Saffron Demel Espute from Santander UK. So let's begin then. A little bit of a recap on this key issue study that we did for 2024. It's a study that we've been running since almost since the last time we ran this event, actually, since 2018. We ask about 150 enterprises to participate, and they do. About 90% of the companies of those companies that participate have revenues in excess of $1 billion. There's the demographic split there. So it's a pretty large study. It gives us a good feel for the sorts of questions that buyers, clients, enterprises, whatever you want to call them, are asking of their service providers. So I'm going to ask David to talk us through the main points of that study. What emerged from that study, Dave?
Brilliant, thanks, Julian. So I think the one of the biggest themes that you'll hear a lot of us talking about a lot this year is going to be do more with less, which now sounds obvious, and we've probably been saying that for the last 20 plus years, but the data really backed that up this year. So I think that what we saw is that, as you can see on the slide, 64% of the organisations said it's about driving accelerated growth, but equally 62% said enhanced profitability and cost optimisation. So you can't do both of those in isolation. You have to be then trying to do more, so grow the business, whilst also really looking at how you control your costs. I was chatting to someone earlier, and actually I used to be in procurement at Microsoft for a long, long time. Cost has always been a big issue. I think this year, though, people are actually openly talking about it a little bit more than maybe they used to. Cost has always been a factor, especially if you're in procurement, but actually the business are now realising that you really need to control your costs as your margins aren't increasing, etc. But you also need to be growing the business, because if you're standing still, you're going backwards effectively. So that's what we've seen, and when we look at the data that backs that up, what we've seen is we ask our clients some of the key issues that they're focusing on this year, and cost optimization was number one. Last year it was number two, and in previous years it's been a little bit lower, down at 3. Without sounding like a really bad radio DJ, there's also been some other movement. So what we saw is talent management used to be up at number 3 a couple of years ago, is now down at number 8. So talent management, because we know there's obviously the concerns about the economy and the recession, actually talent is more available than it has been. Can depend on the type of talent you're looking for, but at an Uber level, definitely a shortage of talent has gone away. So there's actually that has moved, but cost optimization is now at number 1. So that's the biggest factor. When we think about, okay, what are people doing about it? When we talk to enterprises, their real focus is around driving digital transformation, improving the operational efficiency, and using data and analytics to try and drive the business, understand why customers are contacting you, the services you're delivering, how effective they are. So that's sort of the areas that buyers are looking at. And then when they turn to service providers to think about, okay, what can our service providers help us with, is the areas that we've got on that slide really. So it's around how do you leverage sort of the low cost locations. So again, when you're trying to drive down cost, where are the right locations that you can be delivering these services from? There's also about thinking about talent pyramids and delivery pyramids. So one of the things that I know I used to go after on the procurement side is our pyramid wrong? Are we paying for too high skilled people, or have we got the right skills in the right places? Are we paying the right price? So really focus on that talent pyramid. Then it's also about hiring talent from different places. So that's not just going to low cost locations, but different sources of talent. So is that gig workers, impact sourcing? We do a lot of work here at Everest Group around impact sourcing. We're really passionate about the value that can bring to a business. So thinking about different sources of talent. And then lastly, focusing on employee retention. So obviously we know that when you've got high attrition, that has an impact on service delivery. We know in whatever business you're in, when you lose people, delivery can suffer, but also hiring new people is expensive. You also have the time to proficiency that you have to overcome. So really thinking about employee experience as well as customer experience, also thinking about the efficiency and looking to leverage technology. And you'll hear a lot about that later when we talk about Gen AI, because every session has to have Gen AI included, otherwise you get put in prison, I think. But we are going to be talking about that, but actually that's sort of the key areas, because when you're looking to control costs, taking volume and improving efficiency are the ways that you can do that. So hopefully, Julian, that's addressed the question, but that's sort of some of the key issues that we've seen and the key themes, especially from a service provider perspective.
Fantastic. So from an enterprise point of view, it's about optimization, and from what enterprises or from what clients, buyers are asking of their service providers, it's also about optimization, but there are some other things in the mix too. So perhaps we can expand that on that a little bit, Rohit, talking about what the study tells us about the global services market globally, and perhaps a little bit more on your area of speciality, which is GBS.
Yeah, thanks, Julian. And generally, when we check the growth sentiment, the expectation is that this year the growth will be muted, though better than last year. I personally, when I saw the data, I thought that's a very positive outcome given the macroeconomic and geopolitical situation. So it kind of reflects there is a what we call cautious optimism in the industry. Some specific numbers: about 42% of enterprises expect the budget for global services to grow by more than 5%, and about 6% of these were actually above 15%. And interestingly, another 40% expect the budgets to remain in the same ballpark. That is where my comment on positivity was, that less than 20% companies actually expect the budgets to shrink, and that's less than what we anticipated when we started the study. Interestingly, this is translating as per our estimates into about 3% growth in the industry in 2024. But we do expect the situation to start improving, picking up in second half of the year. So 2025, and again, a lot can change between now and then. We all know it's a bit of a crystal ball gazing, but the growth could pick up to about 5% next year. Couple of specific themes around where this growth might come from is that more than 50% of the enterprises believe that large portion of this additional budget will go into growing in-house delivery, the captive GBS model. And that's very interesting, because in the last few years, we have seen the overall market continues to grow, the balance marginally tilting towards in-house model year on year. In 2023, the captives added about 11% in headcount, which was far exceeding how service provider model grew. They added about 300 centers in the last 12 months. So there's a lot of activity there, and then further expected to grow. But interestingly, they are also emerging, the captives, the GBS, are emerging as a big client segment for outsourcing or third-party service providers, because they are seeking support in setting up centers in a BOT model, build, operate, transfer, to check their CapEx. They are requiring help to accelerate hiring, contingent staffing, consulting services. So there's a lot of demand from there. Just one more aspect on the service provider side in terms of where we see them growing. And from the first part of my comments, it seems like they're not growing, but that's actually not true either. We saw about 250 new centers added by delivery centers added by service providers as well. And David mentioned a few times about talent management, attrition is dipping, but the project ready talent is not there. So it's a big focus area. And a lot of this expansion is in that spirit to improve the sustainability of the talent supply. And the primary goal is that when the market turns the corner and the growth comes back, are we going to be ready to pick that up? So that's kind of the overall observation where we are seeing this, Julian.
Thanks. And Saffron, would you like to comment on that? So I think there are some things in there that you can validate or throw back at us by way of growth stats and the model.
Yeah, so I think just on that point in terms of, growth versus, cost and things like that, to that point, and from a client perspective, that trade-off is really important, particularly from a procurement perspective as well. We really need to ensure that business case stacks up, as you mentioned, around, doing more for less, ensuring that we can model the cost, model the commercial models that we're using as well, to ensure that we're really getting that balance between cost versus investment as well, and also for that stakeholder buy-in as well at the top of the organisation where the decisions are really being made. It's about ensuring that they're bought into the risk of doing something versus not doing something, and how does that work with our service providers as well, because we want to ensure that from a profitability perspective, it's sustainable for them at the same time as obviously being cost efficient for us as well.
So I think we've got something like 81% of enterprises that we interviewed said that budgets will either be flat or go up a bit. Is that your experience too?
I think from my personal experience, we're trying to keep the cost as flat as possible in this environment. Obviously, the trade-off with that is that, we're in an inflationary environment at the moment, and therefore, costs are going up. So how can we dampen the impact of that inflationary pressure? And, it's about moving to possible alternative commercial models where it's not input-based but output-based, has been mentioned here already, acceleration of the use of technology, and digital transformation as well, and what does that look like for the organisation against its strategic priorities, and how can we move that forward at pace, in with the understanding that some of this stuff costs money.
So you're not beating your service providers over the head quite yet. It's a discussion about how things can be done better.
Particularly, when we talk about BPO, these are our strategic partners. We're not trying to get them into bankruptcy. We want to ensure that we deliver a partnership that works for both parties, and we obviously have cost pressures internally that we need to meet, and how do we go on that journey together versus a kind of combative approach to negotiation, for example.
Okay, good. So that segues nicely. So let's think about those evolving expectations, because I think that's what we're talking about. And how those evolving expectations sit with the global services initiatives broadly and with providers specifically. So let's start, Rohit, perhaps talk us through the GS initiatives piece first.
Yeah, and this is really interesting because if you also look at some of the top line messages, when we ask enterprises, what do you want from your GBS or your delivery centers, it's pretty much they want everything. So the first thing, and David said cost pressures are number one challenge. So they want the costs to remain low, cost optimization. So they're like, we're going to set up more of these centers. We're going to grow you at double digits a year, and all the inflationary environment, talent pressures. But just don't spend more money. Save some if you can. So the theme there is that GBS organizations need to keep an eye on the cost. They cannot let that get away from them. And the reality is that not everybody is able to deliver on expectations. So we have seen a big spike in divestitures as well. And that's where a lot of service providers are kind of stepping in to help them out. The second priority is that while you do that, see how can you help us improve the top line. And that is a very different expectation that requires building domain understanding, business understanding, having the right kind of senior talent, which is not the traditional model, how these offshore centers were set up. So, but that is happening. In fact, we have our own persona assessment on how organizations add more value, and we have seen a continuous shift upwards where mature, delivery center organizations are kind of stepping up and saying, because we are part of you, we can help you in IT and operations collaboration. We can drive innovation. We can do that at a low cost. So a lot of activity in there, and that is where the particular focus area, which is the third highlight for us as well, is building that digital tech talent. A lot of that growth, I spoke about 11% last year, and it has been continuing from 2022, came from scaling technology skills, technology teams. And that continues to be flavor of the year, where there is a lot of optimization on the operations. So while the more work is moving into that model and those locations, there is net optimization of headcount, but the technology teams are scaling up and probably in the same location under the same umbrella to allow them to kind of work together to drive end objectives. So those are some of the key themes that GBS are expected to deliver on.
And on the provider side, Ricky, how does that translate to what providers are being, what's expected of them?
So I think going by the discussion so far, it definitely seems cost optimization is one of the key expectations from providers. But then I think that's probably half the picture. That's to say that there are other things as well that providers expect. And as part, one of these key findings of this study was also that providers have come to, enterprises have come to expect a lot in terms of productivity improvements, quality of delivery, innovation. So these also do not have to be compromised at the expense of cost. And and one of the key findings of this issue, the study was that the customer satisfaction from for enterprises has actually dipped by 20% over the last 2 years. And some of the key reasons highlighted which led to this were really things around lack of innovation, poor decision frameworks, governance frameworks, and really the whole decision making and governance making process, right? So it is a key problem. I think it for providers to solve for as we head into 2024, given that cost optimization needs to be managed with other competing objectives, which is around innovation, productivity, and service delivery quality.
Can I just add a point?
Yeah, go for it.
I think when we talk about stakeholder management as well, we did a recent study where, and this is looking at customer experience providers, but relevant I think across all areas. But we actually asked about 50 enterprise buyers what differentiates 5 or 6 of your top providers. And when we looked at it, every single person who responded said really there's not much differentiation in the market from these providers. The one thing that differentiates them is their account management and their stakeholder management and how well they manage us. So that is really important when you look at it from a buyer perspective, because if everyone else looks the same, you do, as I said, having been a buyer, you go towards the ones that you feel have your interests at heart, understand your business, and are being proactive in identifying ways to reduce your cost and improve your service. Just one last point, my own little hobby horse on innovation. I do think that if I was a service provider, I would feel quite aggrieved a lot that innovation is always used against me, because having been on the buyer side, we used to be negative about our providers not bringing innovation, but when they pushed it back and said, what do you mean? We didn't really have a great definition of what we meant by innovation. So it is always a stick to hit service providers with, but I think sometimes enterprises aren't 100% clear what they actually think of innovation. So I think you've got to bear that in mind, but it is a stick that we've used for a long time.
Final comment, if you would, on Saffron on this point. Satisfied with your buyers? Without pointing any fingers?
I think your point there around definition of what innovation is, I think from a partnership perspective, when we partner with service providers, they have the best outlook on, what can be changed, what can be done, but it's the translation of that and the communication of what does that actually look like, meeting us where the organization is at in terms of, this is where you are today, this is the journey that you could go on to achieve, X, Y, Z. And then from a procurement perspective as well, where we're involved is building out that business case to then, look at how we invest in that capability then, or does that work, and bringing that up the organization to then communicate with senior stakeholders to make that decision. But I think that point there around innovation, sometimes organizations actually don't know what that looks like. It is a bit of a buzzword, but actually I think where we can partner with service providers, particularly strategic providers, and go on that journey together, it makes all of the difference.
Fantastic. So there are some instances where it works well.
Oh yeah, absolutely,
okay.
yeah. And that's my personal view, having worked, public sector and private sector as well.
Very good. Okay, so let's drill down a little bit more into the service provider landscape. And Ricky, I think you're going to talk us through what's going to happen with bill rates. This is kind of critical stuff, nitty gritty.
Thanks, Julian. I think one thing that we can all agree on, and I think Saffron also alluded to this fact, is that it's going to be a very hard conversation to get buyers to agree to increase bill rates. I think so. My team at Everest Group tracks outsourcing pricing very closely, and what we've observed through 2023 was that the price increases that providers were able to get through 2023, the magnitude was almost half of what they were able to get in 2022, which was a very strong sort of a seller's market per se, if you call it. So having said that, that's why there are alternate commercial levers which will start to become more important, and those could be, for example, we touched upon some of those around reshaping your pyramids, looking at, and one of the most important things that I believe this year is going to be looking at alternate commercial models. And it's also already started to happen over the last 6 months or so. I think we've been talking about it for the last few years, but now I think in the last 6 months or so, I've seen a lot of activity around movement to alternate commercial models. We've seen a lot of clients or buyers coming to us in terms of, okay, we want to move away from these traditional time and material models to more managed services, outcome-based models, right? And it seems very cliched, but we've started to see much number of deals. In fact, a lot of transformation deals as well, where part of the fee, the provider's fee, was contingent on achieving a certain outcome, which is phenomenal, I think. And it's not just to say that these were small-scale providers trying to make big in the market. These were some of the largest providers you probably can imagine in the market. So it's a big theme out there in terms of trying to move from time and material to more trying to more accountability-based managed services models. In addition, I think the elephant in the room, right? Gen AI is going to be a serious conversation this year. We've already seen a lot of enterprises move away from doing just POCs to actually starting to put it into production in a few cases. So it's going to be a big conversation this year. And of course, one of the most important conversations last year also we realized is that given the interest rates have remained significantly high throughout the year, payment terms is going to be a big negotiation factor. Already we see clients going back and asking for much more linear or longer payment terms because the interest rates are pretty high. So these are some interesting levers to watch out for as we head into 2024.
So there's a bit of a shift then from it being a seller's market, you're saying, to being a buyer's market?
I would say that because we've seen that shift happen over the last 12 months or so, moving from what we used to call it as a sort of an employee's market moving to an employer's market, right? Because multiple factors contributed to it. The talent situation cooled down, bill rates started to go down a bit, and of course, it was obviously the primary reason contributing to it was the geopolitical instability, the curbs on discretionary spending, and so on. So,
of course, some of those factors still exist, but there's still something that perhaps we've become used to it, or things have plateaued, or whatever it is. Again, let's just ask you to validate that, Saffron. True in your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I would absolutely echo that alternative commercial model point there in terms of moving away from time and materials, which I guess, you know, from a personal perspective feels more comfortable. You can see, you know, the number of days that people are working and the exact rate that's being charged for those people. But again, from a certainty, you know, quality delivery, service delivery perspective, moving towards that output-based type of model where, you know, the risk is almost put back on the kind of service provider to, you know, deliver against those. Of course, from a procurement perspective, supporting stakeholders with building out a clear scope, clear SLAs, clear deliverables to make sure that actually, when it comes to it, there isn't a discussion or a fight over, you know, what was meant to be done versus what actually happened is really critical to make sure that is successful. I think additional to that as well, you know, to the point raised around innovation earlier, you know, those gain share type of models as well, how can we use those to ensure, you know, that, you know, both partners in that service delivery are, you know, seeing some benefit of actually implementing those initiatives to make sure that it actually works from a commercial perspective as well as delivering that kind of, you know, optimization of service as well.
Excellent. Any questions from the floor? We're kind of wrapping this part of the discussion. Oh, we've got one over here.
So it's a quick question on this section and outcomes in these sort of outcome-based agreements. So touched earlier upon impact sourcing and that there's an expectation that there's going to be a sort of focus this year on different talent models, such as impact sourcing. That's also can have business benefits. That isn't listed. So a sort of impact agenda doesn't seem to have it hasn't found its way onto this list. Do you foresee that impact agenda finding its way into the outcomes that buyers are looking for? And do you think shared agenda and outcomes in terms of impact?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think sustainability and then all aspects of ESG, but sustainability as being part of it, impact sourcing, even the governance, is becoming more and more a part of the RFPs that are going out there. Buyers that we're speaking to are putting more emphasis on it. It used to be 2-3% of a weighting of an RFP. It's now 15-20%. We're talking to a lot of enterprises who are saying, how do we actually measure some of these things? Whether you're talking about sort of zero carbon emissions, and how do you really measure that? Or they've got ESG certification, but which ones are best in the market? We're getting a lot of those questions now as enterprises are starting to take that much more seriously, and realising, obviously, when you start thinking about Scope 3 services, etc., you've got to think about your supply chain. You've got to then start thinking about that in terms of the providers that you're working with. So yes, I think it will definitely become a key factor. I mean, impact sourcing can also control cost, not because it's cheap labour, but because attrition is lower, engagement is better, etc., etc. So there are ways of doing it, but really it is becoming a hot topic that might not be on 2024. I think in 2025, depending on where the economy goes, people will turn their attention to that, as it's like that's becoming the hot topic that we're hearing about.
Saffron, I'm going to ask you to comment on that. If we can have, there's another gentleman here who wants to ask a question. Saffron, would you care to comment on the impact sourcing element, and then we'll jump to one last question here.
Yeah, I'll make it really quick. I think absolutely that impact sourcing, the ESG agenda is big topic at the moment. I think one of the things that I look at personally from a sustainability perspective is not just what is an organization already doing that we can kind of piggyback off, but from the delivery of the service, what impact can we have as part of the relationship that we're building together. And actually I think from a supplier management perspective as well, that is becoming a lot more tracked as well. It's not just what have they said in the RFP, okay, tick, they say they can do that and then we never look at it again. Actually, it's tracking those ESG initiatives to make sure that the supplier is actually delivering what they say they could do and what they will do in the future as well.
Great stuff. And final question here.
Hi, so this is especially to the Everest guys. You talked about talent management through alternative talent sources and low cost locations. So can you elaborate more on that, and what are the emerging locations probably you're seeing in the recent times?
Right.
Yeah, so and again, we are seeing emerging locations and existing locations grow everywhere. So part of the reality check is that in 2020 when COVID started, everybody realized how concentrated they were in locations like India, Philippines. There were some hiccups in Philippines particularly, and everybody promised that as soon as situation improves, we are going to diversify this, distribute this. But 2021, 2022 did not offer any relief because you had to grow so fast. Very few locations offered that. So there's that bit of a reality check. I wanted to get that out of the way. Now, in terms of new locations, there are kind of three, sets of locations that are emerging and growing. If we look closer to here in the Europe region, then the established locations like Poland, a few others around it, have had a lot of saturation, continue to grow, but highly competitive. So we are seeing a lot of growth in locations like Romania, up in the Baltics, in tier 2 cities in Poland, in Czech, etc. So that's kind of first pattern we see, and many locations are emerging. Then there is the established locations like India, and in the Southeast Asia region, we are seeing an increasing, particularly the service providers are making large investments in tier 2, tier 3 cities. So we are seeing the Agras, the Goas, the Jaipurs kind of really knock it up. GBS model is still not moving that fast. There's a bit of apprehension there. And then there's the third set of locations which are offering a lot of potential a little bit further down the road, but there's a larger investment needed. So these are the locations in Africa beyond your Egypt and South Africa. So in the middle, many of these countries, Ghana, Nigeria, a few more. So that is where we are seeing investment more from a long-term perspective, because the ecosystem is still developing, but that's a bet to be placed to be more sustainable 10 years down the line. So it's just a bit of everything that we are seeing. Depends on what you need, how quickly you need them, for which region you are serving that, all of those factors.
I'm going to have to draw, thank you very much for the question. I'm going to ask you all to put your hands together for the panellists, because we've got to go through a bit of a changeover now. Thank you, guys.